Luke McAllister had spent most of his young life under the open sky, riding across miles of dry grass, red earth, and quiet hills. He was only 24, but he already knew the land better than most men twice his age. His father had raised him to respect the quiet of nature, to listen before acting, and to treat every person he met with fairness. Because of this, Luke rode gently and thought carefully, even on days when he was tired and the sun burned hot above him. On this particular afternoon, Luke was guiding a small group of cattle across a long stretch of Arizona grassland. He had been on the trail since sunrise, and his throat felt dry as dust. When he reached the edge of a narrow valley, he noticed a line of cottonwood trees following a stream below. He could hear the soft ripple of running water, and he knew this creek would be a good place to give his horse, Scout, a drink and rest for a few minutes. Scout had carried him faithfully all morning, and Luke believed it was only fair to stop and let the animal breathe. He guided Scout down the slope slowly, careful not to startle the cattle grazing nearby. As he reached the bottom, the air around the creek felt cooler, and the sound of the water brought a small smile to his face. After hours in the heat, even the shade felt like a gift. Luke dismounted and led Scout closer to the creek. The horse dipped its muzzle into the clear water and drank eagerly. Luke crouched beside him, splashing some water onto his own face to shake off the dust of the trail. For a moment, everything felt peaceful: the soft wind in the trees, the gentle sounds of cattle moving in the distance, and the steady humming of insects living their quiet lives around the creek. Luke was grateful for the calm. He leaned back against a tree and took a slow breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs. Then, just as he was about to relax completely, he heard something unexpected. It was not the sound of an animal or the rustling of leaves. It was laughter. Light, clear, and close enough to make him suddenly alert. Luke froze, listening carefully. He hadn't expected anyone else to be near this remote stretch of land. Travelers usually kept to known paths, not hidden creeks like this one. And this laughter was not the rough voice of a cowboy or the deep call of a scout. It sounded like young women speaking softly to one another. Luke straightened, unsure what he should do. The last thing he wanted was to intrude on anyone's privacy. He quietly took Scout's reins and began to step away from the sound, trying to leave before anyone noticed he was there. But just as he turned, he accidentally stepped on a dry branch. The loud snap echoed through the quiet valley. The laughter stopped. Luke felt his heart jump. He didn't want to frighten anyone, but the sudden silence told him the people by the creek were now aware of him. He stayed where he was for a moment, unsure if moving forward or running away would make things worse. He slowly raised his hands to show he meant no harm, even though no one could see him clearly yet. Through the trees, he caught a brief glimpse of movement: 3 figures near the water. He realized they were Apache women, and they had been bathing and washing clothes in the creek. The moment he understood this, he quickly turned his head away and took a step back. It was a private moment, and he wanted no part in disturbing it. Luke had always been told to treat everyone with respect, especially the native people whose land this had once been entirely. He knew misunderstandings between settlers and Apache people had caused problems in the past, and he did not want to add to them. He wished he could disappear quietly, but he knew running away might look suspicious or disrespectful. Before he could decide, he heard a voice call out. It was gentle, not angry, but firm enough to tell him that the women had seen him. Luke kept his eyes on the ground and spoke in a calm voice. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to come close. I was just letting my horse drink. I'll leave now." Quote, he took a slow step back, then another. A second voice called out, this one a little closer. Luke still did not look up. He didn't understand the words, but he knew from the tone that they were asking something. He swallowed and tried again. "I mean no harm. I didn't know anyone was here." Then he heard footsteps on the soft grass. Luke's heart raced, but he stayed still. He kept his hands visible, not wanting the women to think he was a threat. He felt the warm breeze on his back and could hear the quiet ripple of the creek behind him. After a moment, he heard someone approach from the trees. He finally allowed himself to glance carefully to the side. One of the women was stepping toward him, not too close, but close enough that he could see her clearly. She was dressed now, her hair tied back, and she watched him with steady eyes. She seemed young, perhaps near his own age. Luke noticed she carried herself with calm confidence, as if she was used to handling unexpected situations. When she spoke again, her English was not perfect, but it was clear enough. "Why you come here?" she asked. Luke nodded, relieved to understand her. "My horse needed water," he explained. "I didn't know anyone was here. I didn't mean to disturb you." The woman studied him, her expression serious but not unkind. Luke kept his posture open and respectful. He knew his words needed to match his actions. He took another small step back, giving more space. The woman looked him up and down, measuring whether he was telling the truth. After a moment, she nodded slowly, as if she believed him, or at least believed he was not trying to cause trouble. She glanced back toward the creek where the other two women remained behind the cover of trees. Luke shifted slightly, careful not to make sudden moves. He wanted to explain himself more clearly, so they would understand he was not a danger to them. "I'll leave the creek to you," he said softly. "I'll find another place for water." The woman looked surprised. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she said. "Creek is for everyone. You go, but no need to run." Luke felt a small wave of relief. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. He nodded with gratitude. "Thank you," he said. He stepped back again, guiding Scout gently so the horse wouldn't make any noise that might startle them. As he moved away, he kept his eyes lowered out of respect. The woman watched him until he reached the shade near the edge of the valley. She seemed to be making sure he truly meant no harm. Just as he turned to leave, he heard a soft murmur of conversation behind him. The voices were no longer tense. He smiled faintly to himself, grateful that the encounter had not gone badly. He had always believed respect could solve more problems than anger, and this moment proved it once again. Luke mounted Scout and steered him toward the slope leading back to the open land. As he rode away, he kept thinking about the three women by the creek. He had not expected to meet anyone that day, much less to share a quiet moment of understanding with strangers. The land was full of surprises. He thought some challenging, some peaceful, and some teaching lessons without saying much at all. That afternoon, as the sun began to lower in the sky, Luke continued his journey with a calmer heart. He had entered the valley only seeking water, but he left with a deeper reminder. Kindness and respect could turn even unexpected moments into something meaningful, and the sound of the women's laughter, which he had heard only briefly, stayed with him like a warm memory he would not soon forget. Luke rode away from the creek slowly. But even as he guided Scout back toward the open plain, his mind kept drifting to what had just happened. The encounter had been brief, yet it had carried a weight he could not ignore. He had always known the world was full of misunderstandings between people, but he never liked how easily fear or quick judgment could build a wall between strangers. Today, however, something different had happened. Something gentle, something honest. He looked up at the sky, squinting at the late afternoon sunlight, and breathed deeply. Scout's hooves made soft thuds on the dirt as they climbed the slope. The cattle were still grazing farther up, calm as ever, unaware of the human pause in the valley below. Luke guided them onward, but he kept glancing back at the creek, half expecting another voice to echo from the trees. Nothing came, but the quiet felt richer somehow, as if the land remembered what had happened. After moving the cattle a short distance away, Luke stopped again. He crouched down near a small patch of shade and drank from his canteen. He took his time, trying to settle his thoughts. He replayed the young Apache woman's words in his mind. Her calm voice, her steady way of speaking. She had not been afraid of him. Not really. She had simply wanted to know the truth, and once she saw it, her tension had eased. Luke respected that. While he rested, he noticed something he hadn't paid much attention to earlier. The sky was shifting. Small clouds gathered toward the west, hinting that a mild evening storm might arrive. He would need to move the cattle to a safe spot before any rain came. But even as he prepared to mount Scout and continue the day's work, he heard something again. Soft voices. They were faint, almost blending into the wind. Luke straightened. He recognized the sound immediately. The Apache women were still nearby. But this time the tone was different. Quieter. More curious. Luke hesitated, unsure whether he should remain still or walk away. But before he could decide, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. Slowly and politely, keeping his hands relaxed at his sides. The young woman who had spoken to him earlier was approaching once again. She was not alone this time. The other two women followed her, fully dressed and walking with cautious interest. The three moved together like a small, united group, alert, but not frightened. Luke stayed still and waited for them to come closer before he spoke. "Is everything all right?" he asked gently. The young woman nodded. She seemed to have a name now in Luke's memory, even though he didn't know it yet. She had a presence. Calm. Thoughtful. Observant. When she answered, her voice was steady. "You leave fast," she said. Luke blinked, a little surprised by the comment. "I didn't want to bother anyone," he explained. "I thought leaving quickly would show respect." The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him the way someone examines a puzzle piece they want to understand. The other two women remained behind her, whispering gently to each other in their own language. After a moment, the young woman lifted her hand and pointed toward Luke's path. "You dropped something," she said. Luke frowned. "I did?" She nodded again and held out a small object. When Luke saw it, he recognized it instantly. It was a leather strap from his saddlebag, something he must have loosened while stepping back earlier. The women must have found it near the trees. Luke reached out carefully and took it from her with a grateful smile. "Thank you," he said. "I wouldn't have noticed." The woman didn't smile, but her eyes softened a little. Her voice, still accented but confident, carried a hint of curiosity when she spoke again. "You ride alone?" she asked. Luke nodded. "Most of the time, yes. I'm driving cattle today, but it's a small group." She looked at Scout, then up at the cattle in the distance. "Long day for one man," she said softly. Luke chuckled. "I'm used to it." They stood quietly for a few seconds. The breeze moved gently between them, carrying the sounds of the creek and the distant cattle. Luke felt the silence was not uncomfortable. It felt like two worlds learning how to talk without rushing. Finally, he asked, "Are you and your friends all right? I hope I didn't scare you earlier." The woman shook her head. "We saw you before you saw us," she said calmly. "We heard your horse." Luke's eyebrows lifted. He hadn't heard anything at all. Their awareness impressed him. "You move quietly," he said. She nodded. "We know this land. We learned to listen." Luke respected that deeply. Growing up on a ranch had taught him many useful things. But the quiet skill these women had was on another level, shaped by generations who lived close to the earth. The young woman turned for a moment, speaking briefly with the other two. Their tone was gentle, thoughtful. When she faced Luke again, she seemed to have made a decision. "My name is Nahila," she said. Luke repeated it softly. "Nahila. That's a beautiful name." She didn't blush or lower her gaze. Instead, she watched him with the natural confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was. "And your name?" she asked. "Luke," he answered. "Luke McAllister." Nahila tried his name aloud, shaping the syllables slowly. "Luke," she said. "Easy name." "After." "Easy name." Luke grinned lightly. "Easier than yours." This time, one of the other women, slightly younger, with lively eyes, gave a soft laugh. Nahila glanced back at her with a hint of amusement, before returning her attention to Luke. "You go now?" she asked, tilting her head toward his cattle. "I should," Luke replied. "Storm might come later." Nahila looked at the clouds, assessing them with practiced awareness. "Small rain only," she said. "Not strong." Luke trusted her judgment more than his own. But he had another question resting on his mind. He hesitated, then spoke. "Do you live nearby?" Nahila nodded once. "Not far. Our camp is past the trees." She pointed behind her. "We wash clothes today." "That is all." Luke nodded. "I see." Nahila studied him again. "You leave your cattle for water." But you go far from them because of us, she said. That is unusual. Luke shrugged. I didn't want to disrespect you. Her eyes softened again. And this time, Luke thought he saw something else. Appreciation. Maybe even trust. Beginning to form. She stepped aside, giving him a clear path back toward the creek, though he had no intention of returning there. He was already on his way to the open plain with his cattle. You are different from many men, Nahila said quietly. Luke wasn't sure how to respond. Compliments always made him slightly awkward, so he simply nodded. Thank you, he murmured. Nahila nodded back. Then she and her friends slowly began to walk away, back toward the trees that hid the trail leading to their camp. Luke watched them go for a moment, feeling something shift inside him, not fear, not worry, something warmer, gentler. He mounted Scout. But before he left the valley completely, he looked back one last time. Nahila stood at the edge of the trees, watching him with a thoughtful expression. When their eyes met, she lifted her hand in a small, calm gesture. Not a wave exactly, more like a silent goodbye. Luke touched the brim of his hat in return, a quiet sign of respect. Then he turned Scout and rode back to his cattle, feeling that the world had grown slightly bigger in the space of a single afternoon. Luke spent the rest of the afternoon guiding the cattle toward a safer place where they could settle before evening. Even though his hands kept busy with ropes, reins, and whistles, his thoughts drifted again and again to the encounter by the creek. It felt strange, the way such a quiet moment could stay with him so strongly. But it wasn't only the surprise of meeting the women. It was the peaceful way the meeting had ended, especially after Nahila spoke to him with such steady calmness. He kept remembering her gaze, clear, thoughtful, certain. She had looked at him not as someone to fear, but as someone to understand. And somehow, that simple act made the land around him feel different, bigger, brighter, almost warmer. By late afternoon, the clouds that had gathered earlier drifted apart. The sky turned soft and gold, painted by the lowering sun. Luke's cattle spread out, grazing quietly near a flat, open patch of land. Scout lowered his head, pulling at the grass with slow, steady bites. Everything seemed peaceful enough that Luke could finally rest his shoulders and relax. Still, he couldn't help glancing toward the direction of the creek every few minutes. He told himself he was only checking the landscape, only watching for any signs of trouble. But deep down, he knew better. There was a small hope inside him, quiet but persistent, that he might see Nahila and her friends again. Not by accident this time, but simply because fate had more to say. As the light softened, Luke walked along the edge of the grazing area to make sure the cattle were safe. He had taken no more than a dozen steps when he noticed something unusual. On the ground near a cluster of rocks lay a small bundle of wild plants, fresh ones, still green and fragrant. Luke bent down and picked them up. The leaves were carefully wrapped with thin fiber strings. Someone had placed them there intentionally. Luke frowned thoughtfully. He didn't remember seeing the bundle earlier. He turned it in his hands, noticing the softness of the leaves and the faint earthy scent. These plants were familiar. They were used for basic healing, something his mother had taught him years ago. That was when the truth clicked in his mind. The Apache women had left it, or rather, they had placed it somewhere he would find it during his rounds. But why? Luke stood slowly, his eyes scanning the trees nearby. For a moment, everything was still. The shadows stretched long across the ground, and the soft rustling of wind filled the open space. Then he saw movement, quiet, careful movement farther among the trees. A figure stepped out from behind a cluster of tall bushes, her presence calm and steady. Nahila. Luke felt something warm settle in his chest. He held the small bundle of plants up slightly to show he had found it. You left this? He asked. Nahila nodded. Her two friends stood behind her, half hidden by the leaves, but Luke could sense they were relaxed. They were not hiding from him, they were simply being watchful, as anyone would be when approaching a stranger's space. Luke looked down at the plants again. What are they for? He asked gently. Nahila took a slow step closer, stopping a respectful distance away. The light of the sunset touched her face, giving it a warm glow. For a cut, she said, or a bruise. Good for healing. Luke blinked. Did you think I was hurt? She shook her head, then pointed towards Scout and the cattle. Long work makes tired hands. This helps. Luke looked at his palms. He hadn't realized how red and sore they were. Between guiding cattle, adjusting ropes, and hours of riding under the harsh sun, small cuts had formed without him noticing. He smiled faintly. Thank you. That's very kind. Nahila studied him for a moment, as if making sure he accepted the gift with sincerity. Then she nodded once, satisfied. You helped earlier, she said softly. You gave your space. We give this. Luke felt something like pride and gratitude mix inside him. He wasn't used to receiving thoughtful gestures from strangers, especially ones who had every reason to keep their distance, but this moment carried a gentle sense of trust. He placed the bundle safely in his saddlebag, careful not to crush the plants. I'll take good care of these, he said. Nahila looked at Scout and then at the cattle, observing them with the quiet attention of someone who understood animals well. You travel far today, she said. Far enough, Luke replied. But it's getting easier now. Nahila's expression softened. Good? Luke hesitated, then asked, Is your friend's foot all right? Nahila glanced back at the woman who had been limping before. The woman nodded shyly from behind her. Nahila returned her gaze to Luke. She stepped on a sharp stone. It cut the skin. But we cleaned it, she said calmly. Then she added, Your water pouch helped. Luke blinked, confused for a moment. Then he realized what she meant. After he left the creek, his saddlebag must have been open. His spare water pouch had likely fallen near the grass. The women must have found it and used it. He hadn't even noticed it was missing yet. You can keep it, Luke said instantly. I have another. Nahila shook her head. She took the pouch from her friend and held it out toward him. No. We return what is yours. Luke accepted it with a grateful nod. The leather felt clean and cool in his hand. They had washed it and taken care not to damage it. You don't have to be this generous, he said. Nahila lifted her chin slightly. Respect goes both ways. The words struck him deeply. He felt them settle into him with weight and warmth. She meant them sincerely, and Luke understood the importance behind them. A quiet moment passed between them. The only sounds were the soft munching of cattle and the distant song of evening birds. Nahila seemed to study this peaceful scene with thoughtful eyes, then turned back toward Luke. You travel alone every day? She asked. Mostly, Luke answered. Sometimes, with others, but today I'm on my own. Nahila exchanged a quick glance with her friends. She seemed to be weighing something before she spoke again. This land can be wide, she said. And wide land can be lonely. Luke chuckled softly. Sometimes. Do you worry? She asked. He paused. The question was simple, but it touched something deeper inside him. He thought for a moment, before answering truthfully. Not often, he said, but I stay careful. Nahila nodded. Careful is good. Then she added, Kind is better. Luke didn't expect the quiet compliment. It made him feel strangely warm, almost lighter. You're kind too, he said. Nahila didn't react with surprise or embarrassment. She simply accepted the words the same way she accepted the world around her, with calm assurance. She stepped back slightly, and her friends moved closer behind her. Luke sensed they were preparing to return to their camp. The sun was lowering, and night was not far. Before she turned to leave, Nahila said, If you need help, or if you see trouble, call near the trees. We listen. Luke blinked in surprise. You would help me? She nodded. We help those who show good heart. Luke felt a quiet, genuine gratitude rise in him. Thank you. That means more than you know. Nahila looked at him with her deep, steady eyes. Good paths find good people, she said. Luke smiled softly. I hope they do. Nahila lifted her hand in a gentle farewell. Her friends followed her as they slipped back into the trees, moving with the quiet grace of people who knew the land like an old friend. Luke watched until the last hint of their figures disappeared among the leaves. Then he let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Something was changing in his journey, something gentle, something meaningful. He didn't know what the next day would bring. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of connection in the vast, quiet land. The next morning arrived with a soft glow spreading across the land. Luke woke before sunrise, as he often did, and stretched his stiff back while the cool dawn air brushed against his face. The sky was painted with gentle shades of pink and silver, promising a warm day ahead. Scout snorted quietly nearby, shaking off the dew from his mane, while the cattle began to stir and graze lazily on the fresh grass. Luke rubbed his eyes and took a deep breath. He felt rested, more than usual. Maybe it was the peaceful night, or maybe it was the memory of the kindness he had shared with Nahila and her friends. Whatever the reason, he felt lighter, as if something quiet and hopeful had settled in his chest. He spent the early hours guiding the cattle toward a small ridge that offered enough shelter from the morning sun. The land stretched endlessly around him, open fields, distant hills, and patches of trees scattered like green islands across the wide plain. He had always loved this view, but today it felt different. The world didn't feel empty. It felt alive, meaningful. By late morning, the sun shone brighter, and Luke decided to move the cattle closer to the creek again. Not the same spot as yesterday, but a bit farther downstream where the water widened into a smoother flow. He wanted to give the animals a chance to drink before continuing the day's journey. As he approached the gentle bend in the creek, he slowed Scout to a steady walk. The cattle followed behind, the soft clopping of hooves blending with the whisper of the wind. Everything was quiet, peaceful, until Luke noticed something unexpected just ahead. 3 figures were moving slowly along the trail, carrying large bundles wrapped in woven cloth. The bundles looked heavy, almost too heavy for the narrow trail they walked on. Luke recognized the women immediately. It was Nahila and her 2 friends. They were dressed modestly, their hair braided neatly, and each of them carried a bundle nearly half their own size. It looked like freshly washed clothes, food supplies, and other items that must have been important for their camp. They hadn't seen him yet. They were focused on the rocky section of the path ahead, where the trail narrowed and dipped before climbing back up. It was the type of path that could twist an ankle or send someone stumbling if they weren't careful. Luke watched for a moment, unsure if he should call out to them. He didn't want to startle them, but he also didn't want to stand back doing nothing while they struggled with the weight of their loads. Finally, he nudged Scout forward gently and cleared his throat to let them know he was near. Nahila turned first. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise, but not in fear. When she realized it was Luke, her expression softened into something warm and familiar. "Luke," she said quietly, "you are here again." He nodded. "I brought the cattle to drink. I didn't expect to see you all." Nahila shifted the bundle on her shoulder slightly. Even though she tried not to show it, Luke noticed the effort it took. Her friends also looked tired, though they stood with quiet resolve, ready to keep walking despite the challenge ahead. Luke dismounted Scout and walked closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "Those bundles look heavy," he said gently. Nahila gave a small shrug. "We carry them often." "I can help," Luke said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, as if she hadn't expected the offer. She exchanged a quick glance with her friends. One of them, the youngest, nodded eagerly, clearly relieved at the idea of some help. The other looked curious but cautious. Nahila, however, studied Luke with calm consideration. "You have work with your cattle," she said. "They're fine for a little while," Luke replied. "Let me carry your bundles on Scout. It'll be easier." Nahila looked at Scout, then back at Luke. After a moment of quiet thinking, she nodded slowly. "We accept your help," Luke smiled gently. He reached for the bundles, lifting them carefully so as not to tear the cloth. He placed them on Scout's back, tying them securely so they wouldn't fall. Scout stood quietly, used to carrying supplies on long journeys. Once the weight was off their shoulders, the women let out a small breath of relief. Luke noticed how their posture relaxed, how their hands finally eased open after holding the bundles for so long. "Your camp is nearby?" Luke asked. Nahila pointed through the trees, just past the rocks and the small hill. Luke nodded. "Then let's walk together." As they moved along the path, Nahila walked beside him while her friends followed close behind. The trail dipped and climbed, but with the heavy bundles on Scout, the walk became easier and calmer for the women. Luke kept the pace slow, not wanting the cattle to wander too far. Every so often, Nahila glanced at them, her eyes observing the animals with interest. "You take good care of them," she said. "I try," Luke replied. "They depend on me," Nahila nodded. "We also depend on the land, and on each other." They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The path was narrow, shaded by tall trees whose leaves rustled softly overhead. The sunlight danced through the branches, creating warm patterns on the ground. After a while, Nahila spoke again. "You live alone?" she asked. "For now," Luke answered. "My family's ranch is far from here. I work this trail by myself most days." "Do you not get lonely?" she asked gently. Luke paused for a moment before answering. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I meet people here and there. Good people. Like you and your friends." Nahila glanced at him with a small spark of amusement in her eyes. "We are just people," she said softly. "Not special." "That's not true," Luke replied. "Kindness makes people special." Nahila didn't respond right away, but the way her eyes softened told him she understood his meaning. As they continued walking, the women began to talk more freely. They spoke of simple things, the work they did each day, the long walks they took to gather food and water, the way their camp moved through different parts of the land depending on the season. Luke listened quietly, appreciating the peaceful rhythm of their voices. They soon reached the rocky section of the trail that Luke had worried about earlier. The ground sloped unevenly, scattered with stones that could easily shift underfoot. Nahila stepped carefully, her movements steady but cautious. Luke walked beside her, ready to offer a hand if needed, though he did not touch her without being asked. Her friends followed, relying partly on each other and partly on the quiet reassurance of Luke's presence. When they reached the top of the small hill, the land opened up into a wide clearing. There, nestled under the shade of several tall trees, was their camp, a few modest shelters made with care, a small fire pit, and neatly arranged supplies. The place felt peaceful, lived in, and warm, with the smell of herbs and wood mixing gently in the air. Nahila's friends hurried ahead to prepare a spot for the bundles. Luke untied them from Scout and handed them over. The women thanked him with quiet smiles. Nahila stepped closer to Luke. Her voice was gentle when she spoke. "You helped us much today. We do not forget." "You don't owe me anything," Luke said. "I'm glad to help." Nahila looked at him for a moment, as if trying to understand the shape of his heart. Then she said, "Not many men offer help without asking for something back." Luke shook his head. "Helping because it's right is enough." Her eyes softened again. She placed her hand lightly over her heart, a gesture of sincere gratitude. "You are good," she said. Luke felt warmth rise through him, unexpected but welcome. Before he left, Nahila gave him a wrapped piece of bread from their morning meal and a small handful of dried berries. "For your journey," she said, "so the road feels lighter." Luke accepted the gift with appreciation. "Thank you." She walked with him to the edge of the clearing. Scout nickered softly as Luke mounted, and the cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. Nahila looked up at him, her expression calm and thoughtful. "Maybe our paths meet again," she said softly. Luke smiled. "I hope they do." As he rode away, he glanced back one last time. Nahila stood beneath the trees, the soft breeze moving her hair gently. Her friends worked quietly behind her, arranging their supplies and preparing for the day. Luke felt a quiet connection building, something steady, something honest, and the trail ahead felt brighter than it had in a long time. The next few days passed quietly for Luke as he continued moving the cattle along the wide trails that stretched across the open land. The work was steady and predictable, yet Luke found his thoughts drifting often. Every time he crossed a patch of shade or heard the soft rustle of wind through the cottonwood leaves, he remembered his time with Nahila and her friends. The memory stayed with him like a warm lantern glow inside his chest, comforting him during the long hours of silence. He didn't expect to see them again so soon. He didn't expect their paths to cross once more in such a meaningful way. But life on the open land was full of surprises, and the world had its own quiet way of guiding people back toward one another. On the fourth day after leaving their camp, Luke followed a familiar bend in the trail, where the ground sloped gently toward a cluster of tall pines. He had brought the cattle out early to avoid the strongest heat of the day. The sky was clear, the air still fresh from the cool morning. Scout walked steadily, occasionally shaking his mane or snorting softly. The cattle seemed content, moving lazily and grazing as they walked. Everything felt calm. Luke hummed a small tune under his breath as he guided them forward, but as he reached the edge of a narrow clearing, he noticed something unusual. A small smoke trail rose into the sky from behind a cluster of bushes. It wasn't the dark, thick smoke of a dangerous fire. It was thin and pale, like smoke from a controlled cooking flame. Luke slowed Scout, wondering who might be nearby. As he moved closer, a figure stepped out into the clearing. It was Nahila. She stood beside the small fire pit, her hands busy tending a pot that simmered over the flame. She wore a simple dress, her hair tied back in a neat braid. When she saw Luke, her expression brightened, though her smile was small and gentle, the kind that grew slowly but warmed the air around her. "Luke," she said softly. "You come again." Luke felt a quiet happiness rise in his chest. "I didn't expect to find you here." "We move our camp," Nahila explained, "just for a few days." Luke dismounted Scout and stepped forward, careful not to disturb the peaceful scene. The cattle wandered to the side, grazing near the tall pines. "You're cooking something," he said, catching the warm scent rising from the pot. Nahila nodded. "Simple soup. For the morning." Luke smiled. "Smells wonderful." Nahila stirred the pot gently. Then she looked up at him with a curious glimmer in her eyes. "You are far from your ranch again." "Still working the cattle," Luke replied. "It's a long trail this season." Nahila motioned for him to sit on a smooth rock near the fire. Luke accepted the silent invitation, feeling strangely comfortable, as if he had been welcomed into a familiar place. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, and a gentle breeze moved through the trees. Nahila's two friends were not far gathering plants, arranging supplies, laughing quietly in the background. The camp felt peaceful and safe. Finally, Nahila ladled some soup into a small wooden bowl and handed it to Luke. He accepted it with gratitude, feeling the warmth spread through his hands. "You share so much," Luke said softly. "I feel like I should offer something in return." Nahila shook her head. "You helped us first. We share because we wish to, not because we must." Luke nodded, understanding her meaning. She was not giving out of obligation. She was giving out of genuine kindness, something rare and sincere. As Luke ate, Nahila sat beside him on another smooth rock. Her posture was relaxed, her eyes calm and observant. She seemed comfortable around him, in a way that felt natural. "You travel alone many days," she said. "Does it never worry you?" Luke thought for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I know the land, and I try to stay careful." "See," Nahila nodded slowly. "You listen to the land, and you respect it. That is good." Luke smiled faintly. "I try." After another moment of quiet, Nahila spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Many men pass through this land, but you are not like them." "How so?" Luke asked gently. "You look with calm eyes," she said. "You do not rush, you do not bring fear, you bring understanding." Luke looked down at the bowl in his hands. He felt humbled by her words. "I think kindness matters," he said softly, "and respect." Nahila nodded. "That is why we trust you." Luke raised his gaze to meet hers. "I'm honored by that." Nahila's eyes held something warm, something steady. It wasn't romantic in a rushed or dramatic way. It was quieter, deeper, built from small moments of honesty and shared respect. After Luke finished the soup, Nahila took the bowl and cleaned it with water from a small jug. As she worked, Luke noticed something nearby, a small cloth-wrapped object resting beside the fire pit. "What's that?" he asked. Nahila looked at it, and then at Luke. "A gift," she said. "For who?" "For you." Luke blinked in surprise. "For me?" She nodded. "Open it." Luke carefully picked up the small bundle and unwrapped it. Inside was a finely woven bracelet, made of soft fiber threads, decorated with small wooden beads that had been polished smooth. The colors were gentle brown, tan, and deep forest green, and the design was simple, yet full of meaning. Luke held it carefully, touched by the craftsmanship. "Nahila, this is beautiful. Why give this to me?" Nahila sat beside him again. Her expression was thoughtful and sincere. "You show respect," she said. "You help when you do not have to. In our ways, we honor such people." Luke felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I don't know what to say." "You do not need to say much," she replied softly. "Just wear it. And remember there are people on this land who stand with you." Luke nodded slowly. "I'll treasure it." Nahila's eyes softened with quiet appreciation. They sat together for a long while, watching the fire flicker. Her friends returned to the camp, carrying bundles of herbs and smiling when they saw Luke again. They moved around the space with ease, preparing food, arranging supplies, and chatting softly in their language. After a while, Nahila stood and motioned for Luke to follow her a short distance. She led him toward the edge of the camp, where the trees opened into a gentle path that looked familiar. "This is where we say goodbye today," she said. Luke nodded. "I need to continue my trail." Nahila looked at the bracelet still in his hands. "Wear it when you travel. It brings good thoughts." Luke tied it around his wrist carefully. "I will." Nahila took a slow breath, then spoke gently. "You helped us, Luke. You showed respect when it mattered. That is something my people do not forget easily." Unquote. One something one haupt may old essentialed. One something my people do not forget easily. One something help may. One something help may. One something help. Luke met her gaze. "I won't forget you either." Nahila paused, then lifted her hand in a soft, warm gesture. Not a wave, not a salute. Something quieter, more meaningful. A gesture of peace, of trust. Luke placed his hand over his heart in return, mirroring the respectful gesture she had shown him days before. "May the land treat you kindly, Luke," she said. "And you," he replied. He mounted Scout, guiding the cattle back onto the trail. As he rode away, he looked back one last time. Nahila stood beneath the trees, watching him with calm eyes, the wind moving gently around her. Her presence seemed to blend with the land itself, steady, strong, and peaceful. Luke felt a deep connection, something he hadn't expected, something that would stay with him for many years. A meeting of two different worlds, brought together not by chance alone but by kindness, respect, and shared humanity. The world felt larger, yet somehow less lonely, and Luke rode on with a quiet heart, carrying with him the memory of the Apache women, the bond he had formed with Nahila, and a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful encounters in life happen when least expected. Their paths had crossed with understanding, and even as they parted, the land felt gentler proof that respect truly could build bridges where fear once stood.